My name is Irwin Oostindie, and I'm with Salish Coast Live and Redress Vancouver, and I wanted to welcome you to this event. And I also want to acknowledge our two partners with today's event. It's the fourth year we've done an event with Heart of the City Festival, and I want to acknowledge that commitment from Heart of the City. Terry is there. Choosing to program work around critical theory, critical studies around culture, like how do we actually do cultural planning, cultural policy in Vancouver. And here we are on the downtown east side, but this obviously applies to everybody across the city. And this is our fourth year doing this event, and it's always a big crowd, and we always say we should do it differently and bigger each year. And you know, instead of doing one panel, it should be a few hours long. We should do small breakout groups. And I think this week I was thinking, you know, it should just be like a 2-day conference or something, because this work is so deep and it's so complex, and so little of it is being done. And so these gestures of occasional events like this, for me, don't do the work justice. Maybe that's a note for next year, Terry. 2 days next year. We've got 100 and something witnesses to that.
That will take 2 days in itself.
So we're going to model some ideas throughout the day, and why don't we do that with the opening? You know, if Christie was just saying, if she wasn't here or if Cease wasn't here, how would I do territorial acknowledgements or welcoming of an event? So I would probably, if you've seen one of the videos, I think from 2 years ago, it was Making Coast Salish Territorial Acknowledgements Matter. Who's seen that video? If you can put your hands up. So just a quarter of you. Okay, so I think 2,000 people have watched that video. It's a good instructional video on some of these issues. I'm not a fan of territorial acknowledgements. I'm quite critical of it. I find it a tokenistic liberal gesture that's actually regressive to our work. It's regressive because it fills in the silence, and I'd rather hear the silence. I'd rather have the acknowledgement that we're in a post-genocidal period here in Coast Salish territory, and that we have work to do. We have a moral and ethical responsibility as settlers and migrants to do something different. Rather than just saying, like my peers at SFU do, well, we're on the practicing our work on the Sloutith and Squamish and Musqueam territory. We give thanks. Well, SFU actually is a real estate company that steals land and makes a shitload of money from the stolen land. They also provide educational services, but they're also a real estate development company. If you look at University up on Burnaby Mountain. So here we are in SFU. I think SFU needs to do more. It has a $7 million or $8 million fund for reconciliation. It's spending it on itself, of course. SFU is good at doing that. So the reconciliation budget is 4 SFU programs around reconciliation. It's not giving a proportion of the sales of the sale of Burnaby Mountain back to the Coast Salish governments or people. So nor do I believe does SFU offer free tuition for Coast Salish students, which I think they should do. So that's how I would do a territorial acknowledgement at an event at SFU.
Aichka. Very good, and thank you. Anta chachlia talitin atla chacha chomasquim tamas. Sana sasitla e meli elano chosim setsamkin chayapalano e wilsim e the thalamat e talsame e wilsimuch. Talitin atla skachomish mistayuch, tzlewatuth mistayuch, temtem tamuch, sasnam, I Ulchten, Elmayuch, Stlitzes, Huehue, Spapiak, Callahan, Sanak, e Mali, e Chacha Tamas. Aitan Skoloin, Kotsni, Kotsnala, Eatin Quel Hunkaminam Kan. Ni hai tanashkos kunita makan. Hai tepka thana mamana e komora al mayuch e Sophia e thana ten to thalamat e thana men as to samkin CM. All right, so that's how I do acknowledgements. And the reason why I do the acknowledgement in that way, oh, welcome, Cease. I just explained in my dialect, Hunkaminam, which is the dialect of the downriver Hunkaminam speaking people of the Coast Salish territories, Coast Salish language families. But I explained to myself, who my parents are, who my great-grandparents are, who my great-great-grandparents are. And I connect myself to my ancestors because it's showing who I am. It shows our connection to the land and how many generations, but it also acknowledges myself as a being on this earth, and the ancestors, when they hear their names, they're like, oh, that's my family. What are we doing today? What's the work we're doing today down there? So it's like, it's that connection as well. But also, when Irwin was talking about, SFU, where we are today, the name Simon Fraser actually is the explorer who came down the river, and it's our families. I come from the lineage of Kayapalano, and he's the warrior who stopped Simon Fraser and turned him around and sent him back. Because we got word from runners from other villages. Those are the villages that I was naming off. Jericho, Stanley Park, Kitsilano, UBC, here we are in downtown Vancouver, but these are all different places. And if it wasn't a village site that we lived on, it was a space that we still used, right? The medicines and the plants and the trees and the pathways and the streams and the connections. I just was changing buses here, and I was coming off Burrard down, I can't remember the street, coming this way. But there's a big sticker on the cement, and it says, did you know there once was a stream that ran through here in the city of Vancouver? I'm like, oh yeah, that's one of the 51 salmon streams that got shut down through the development of the city. And when Simon Fraser came and Kayapalano met him at Kikate, at the village of Kikate, he brought his warriors out, and he brought his canoes, and he brought house boards from our longhouse and strapped them across the canoes, and he sang this song, and the words now have been turned into contemporary song that our dance groups sing, but it's Awatanasisi, eats in stamech de Huelmoch. It means I am a warrior for my Indian people. And the reason why Kayapalano stopped him is because he heard from the other villages, like I was saying, that they were coming to take our canoes and to, take our resources and all these different things. They weren't positive stories, like we're trying to work on today, right? But it's like when you look at the Unitsowitan camps and the tiny house warriors and the blockades that they have across the lands. That's exactly what we were doing, Capilano was doing. Who are you? Where are you from? What are your intentions here? What are you bringing on the land? How long are you staying? What are you taking from the land? Right? That's why we did that protocol. Even visitors, even though we're all Coast Salish families, Cease and myself, we still come from different teachings and different protocols, but one of the common things that a lot of First Nations, Indigenous, I'd identify as Musqueam, we acknowledge our land and our territories and our hunting grounds and our fishing grounds pretty much everywhere. And that's something that when you see the canoe journeys that happen in the summer times or pulling together or tribal journeys, before they get off the canoes and onto the shores, they do the protocol of asking permission to come on the land, right? So that's why we do protocol today. It's something that people are kind of grasping through this reconciliation process. But I'm thankful for the work that Irwin and Kamala and Cease and everybody out there, really trying to educate people as to why we're doing these acknowledgements, why we're going to talk about art today when it's really not art, it's culture and our lives. So it's more than just, I always say, like a check off the list, right? Oh, check, we did the acknowledgements. Okay, now next speaker, right? So it has more depth, more meaning, more connection. And that's what it means to me, and that's why I do acknowledgements. So, Heitzepka.
An Hasqualowans, Heichka, Toits Tanat, Quans Nas, Chenquemen Tomi Wit. I feel like I sometimes feel like I look at the world through the lens of what the elders would see, because I am asked all the time to look through their lens and understand from their point of view. And I think that's probably one of the most important reasons why spending time with every age group in our community is important. And, you know, from living probably 2/3 of my life not inside my community, not in on the reserve, as we say, but I would more say in our village sites. But I can't even say that because I live in East Van and there are village sites close to where I live, but I've been conditioned to live in a world where I am either on reserve or off reserve. I'm either status or non-status. And I've been both, and I've been in both places. So I can definitely speak from experience. And I know that growing up, going to schools, elementary schools, high schools, I knew that there were a lot of misinformed people in the public sphere, in schools especially, that did not have any respect or honor for Indigenous people. And I know because most of the kids I went to high school with in 100 Mile House in different ways met tragic deaths. They didn't live, they're not even in the world anymore, in this world. So, you know, I had gone to school, I started going to school in the Lower Mainland, went to school in 100 Mile House, extreme racism. I think everybody heard about Gustafson Lake. I was not shocked when I heard about that. So I look at all these things that I've had exposed in my life to me through education and through living. And, you know, and I just think the work that we do when we acknowledge the lands and waters, and I've had conversations with Indigenous and non-Indigenous people about this, where some people feel it's an annoying thing to add to their list of things to do. And okay, they're entitled to their opinions, but how annoying do you think it is being Indigenous and having to always speak English, having to always acknowledge a queen I'll never meet, having to acknowledge a God that hasn't been kind to my people, and to ask to acknowledge where we're from and why we say where we're from, because that is what we do in our houses. Any ceremony we have, any event we have, you know, when people come to visit, they all say where they're from. And so that is, for us, that's lifestyle. You can call it what you want, but it's lifestyle to us. But before I really begin, I do want to just acknowledge and thank you all for your patience. My mother's in the hospital today, so I've been on the phone with people, and I've been, you know, we are living in a modern day where we have commitments, and thankfully Irwin checked in on me early this morning just to make sure would I still be coming. And you know, at this point my mom is just sleeping, so there's nothing much I can do to help her. So I can probably help her more by just showing up and doing the things that I said I was going to do today. So so I just want to acknowledge that people had to wait for me today, but that with everything, family's the most important. And I think that's why I do the work I do, where I could end up, if I had to say I have to leave. I work in a community and within communities that have a heart and have empathy. And that's what, you know, I'm going to go segue back to what I was talking about land acknowledgements. And having grown up without having that for most of my life, it's important to me for people to know that we've never left here. And the fact that when the railway was built to this city, that we came with our leaders and we sang the Siam Slolum and sent some of our Siams to England, sent them on that iron horse across the Big Snake, across Turtle Island, onto the gigantic ship that took them to England and back, to say we are never giving this land up, we are never giving up these waters, anything. And that's why we still are very much committed to all of that work today. And a lot of the work I've done, researching my family history, her story, their stories, it all intertwines and comes back to how I have conversations with my mother, how I had conversations with my grandmother and my grandfather and aunts and uncles. And so those family conversations, those kitchen table storytelling sessions helped to shape my knowledge of who I am, of who is from here. And it's helped in some ways reading excerpts of Major Matthew's works, because he at some point decided it was really important to talk to everybody, and including many of the indigenous people here, and to have conversations with those people and to write it down. And those stories became, part of the fabric of what is the true element of research from the city from the early days. And it's points of view of those individuals that help us today to look at those stories and cross-reference whether they were from one of the three nations or maybe they've come from another place. And so all of those stories combining together help us today to look back and see who we are. And so this year I was working with the VPL, doing storytelling, and a lot of my sessions just focused on genealogy and talking about my family's stories from the lands, from the waters, and thinking that I knew a whole story, and then I meet somebody else that adds another piece to it. And that's, I think, one of the things I love about storytelling is how it becomes this beautiful tapestry that we're weaving, and it's like a forever loom, you could say, because the blanket will never be finished. It will always be in the works of being woven. That story is always being woven. And I looked at my ancestors, Xatsalano. My mother found 3 Xatsalanos back in our timeline to understand our story of who we are. And just for people that don't know what I'm saying, Xatsalano is what you all call Kitsilano now. So we see our words and our names have been altered to fit the English language, and yet we still don't fit the English language as Indigenous people, and we won't. At my timeline in this life of mine, I'm still struggling to learn my language because it wasn't in school, because people in my community have programs that aren't always accessible to everybody in the community, because at the end of the day, I'm still a working person that has to provide for my family. So that becomes a priority, not going to a class. And that our people are still having to learn that up until a few years ago, there were 6 people in my community that could fully understand and speak the language. And when you look at the fact that if we didn't write down status, non-status, we just wrote Squamish bloodline, there might be 10,000 of us. But on Indian Affairs documents and Canadian, governmental documents, there might be 4,000. So there are thousands of us and only 6 people that can understand a language that is about to die. And to bring that back is tremendous work, and it actually requires every person in our community learning even a bit of the language to keep it alive and to revive it and to bring it back. And so with each and every one of us seeing that language as a metaphor of a canoe, if we're not paddling, everybody else is doing the work, and we're just sitting there doing nothing. And that's what I think when it comes to land acknowledgements and taking that moment to say, for us, we never forget who we are, and we never forget our ancestors. When I come into a building like this, I completely acknowledge that the DNA of my ancestors are built into this wall. So I cannot come in and not acknowledge them, because they're here with us, and they're part of this room. And every ceremony I've been to, I've been told that we each walk with our ancestors. So, I know that behind me is a huge lineup of ancestors, and they're all embracing each other with Christie Lee's ancestors and with Irwin's ancestors too. Because our people were not people to block people out. Yeah, we might stop and say, who are you? Why are you here? But I think it's pretty obvious from the beginning our doors have always been open. You know, we just have to look at the story of the Great Fire and how the women from my nation rescued people without even thinking for a second, why should we? But in today's age, people will stop and think, why should I help this Native person? Why should I? There's always that, you know? And because of that, like, I don't stop and think that. If there's an emergency situation, I'm not gonna stop and go, why should I help somebody? No, somebody's in danger, you help them. So, and the same goes for people showing up at your door. You're not gonna open your door and have a dialogue, even start a dialogue. We've been in dialogue, we've been waiting for this to happen. Our ancestors have waited for the dialogue to become more open and to become more engaging. And I love the theme music, makes this even more impacting. Just feel like, yeah, the ancestors are blessing this. What's really funny, though, is that our spiritual people will tell us that the spirits talk to us through technology. So, you know, when I first heard that, I thought, you know, poltergeist was true. She did go in the TV. But it's, you know, those things that there's the laughter and humor that is medicine that has fed our people and helped us to have the patience to get to where we are today in the dialogues we're having, and that we're being taken serious, that we're being heard, that this is important. To see a room filled like this, and I'm sorry, but it feels like May outside, and you're all here, so I just want to thank you all for spending your sunny, glorious Friday afternoon in Vancouver with no rain outside. You're inside. So that means a lot. It means a lot to me and my ancestors. Like, we're all feeling the squallowins are lifting. They're very high today. So, hoichach.
And so you'll be hearing from us, but you'll also be hearing from a few other people that we've invited to speak today. I think there's about 5 or 6 people that'll speak briefly. And then Kamala Todd, will ask her to speak briefly. She has a new role as the Indigenous Arts and Culture Planner for the City of Vancouver. Yeah. Which is why she's not sitting here on the panel, because she's a listener today. But we do get to hear her speak a few words. Then we'll have a bit of a networking break. It's a chance for you to, and I'll put some questions up on the screen so you can actually ask each other some questions and try to answer them with each other. And I'll have some coffee, tea, and water. And then we'll come back and have small group discussions. So we'll turn our chairs into small groups, and we have a series of questions to ask everybody. And those questions are essentially how we can change our own practice. Where is that? There it is. So that's the 3 questions. So you can kind of prime your mind that that's where we're heading. That's the light at the end of the tunnel. But before we get there, let's just do some more framing again, just to get us more onto the same page. So this is a project I welcome you to visit, and we're also inviting new participants, Redress Vancouver. Essentially the tag being, after Walking for Reconciliation, get involved in redress efforts where you live. So walking for reconciliation is not enough. That's a kind of a bit of jargon. The difference between reconciliation and redress, we emailed everybody saying, hey, by the way, we tricked you. This is not about reconciliation. This is about redress, because probably only half of the audience would be here if it was called redress. But heavy subject. What is that anyhow? So there's a reason why we don't talk about redress. There's a reason why why Canada talks about we committed cultural genocide, but we didn't commit genocide. There's language is powerful. So the difference between redress and reconciliation is a first step. Pam Palmater talks about it as being fluff. Reconciliation, as we know it, was the AFN and Stephen Harper's the outcome of their agreement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that has really no justice function. When you look at South Africa or other truth and reconciliation processes, they had teeth, there was consequences, but we don't have that in Canada. So the argument being that as a cultural community, we need to push the conversation away from dialogue and education. Yeah, that's important, but let's get on with that, please. And let's start to look at policy changes. Let's start to transform our practices as individuals, as residents of Vancouver, as people on the land here in Coast Salish land. And redress is about the act or an instance of setting right a wrong, a remedy or a cure to seek redress of grievances, restitution, compensation, amends, or reparations for a wrong. So we all know the cultural heroes of Vancouver: Emily Carr, Bryan Adams, Loverboy, I don't know, David Suzuki, right? But can we name 30 or 40 Jim Pattison, Gordon Campbell? So how many Coast Salish cultural heroes do we have in our popular jargon and our understanding of our city?
Probably the only one people know is Chief Dan George.
Yeah, that's right. I say this as a settler, I say it cautiously and with some humility, recognizing that colonialism affects all Indigenous people in Canada, in this colonized country. But I think what I'm arguing is that we have to do place-based work. Here we are in the unceded Coast Salish lands. And federalism is about unifying Quebec and English Canada to keep it together. That's what federalism is. Multiculturalism is an immigration policy that protects white supremacy. So what is Pan Atavism? Pan Atavism is a way that the federal government promotes Indigenous Canadians, right? I'm a Dutch Canadian. I actually don't identify as a Dutch Canadian. I identify as a Dutch settler because I came from Holland. My family came from Holland to unceded Slave lands, right? So how can I be even a Canadian? I mean, technically. Technical things are important sometimes. So that's how I frame it. That's how I've taught my daughter. Pan Atavism is a federal policy that promotes white supremacies. Funding systems, if we're talking about the cultural sector, funding systems perpetuate that. So, as an outcome, you get funding levels from Canada Council, this is up to 2016, of the Canada Council Indigenous Arts funding coming into Metro Vancouver. How much of it went to Coast Salish cultural workers? 3%. Yeah, 3%. Right, so 97% of the Indigenous arts funding coming into Vancouver, by design, because of my suggestion that it's about promoting federalism, it's not about promoting Coast Salish nationhood. It's not about lifting up and remedying this issue that Chief Dan George is the only person that we know. So that's a structural issue that the Canada Council never saw. I took that stat, I took Duncan Lowe's research around marquee funding of arts, right? So he looked critically at what happens to the arts community when the Olympics come. So right, these marquee events, millions of bucks, or Canada 150, millions of bucks, $2.3 million for Canada 150, comes into a community, artists get paid for a couple weeks, and then it's gone. So Duncan looked at that and said, actually there's a negative impact on arts communities when these marquee funding projects come in. And then I looked at his research, and then I added an Indigenous place-based lens. That's how I came up with these numbers. So Canada Council funding for all arts in Metro Vancouver compared to Coast Salish, 99.98% of arts funding from Canada Council coming into Metro Vancouver does not go to Coast Salish artists. 99.98. If we had a pie graph, you'd be hard to even find that 0.02, right? So that would mean the Coast Salish artists in the room here, we have a disproportionately higher number here, but if we're all here, maybe there'd be someone's hand would be funded, and everybody else here would be
Pretty much it.
yeah. So again, this is structural. Our leading cultural institution, the Vancouver Art Gallery, borrowing a graphic from the Guerrilla Girls. You see, we're on a roll here, so it's same thing. 99.9% of the artists at the VAG have not been Coast Salish, right? And so here's the VAG in terms of cultural policy, and I'm not picking on the VAG. I'm just saying from a cultural policy, it's all of us. We're all embracing cultural policy stuff. when an organization wants $235 million in public land for a marquee cultural institution and has no plans for Coast Salish Gallery in the era of reconciliation, in a city of reconciliation, with structural underfunding and structural marginalization of Coast Salish artists, why are we not in an uproar as an arts community? So that's where we need to go. That's called redress. So redress is about remedying things, putting things right. I would say, personally, as a settler, as a visitor, this should be a renaissance for Coast Salish artists. And I don't want to put Cease and Christie Lee on the spot here, but this should be a renaissance period where millions of dollars are supporting Indigenous art from the land here, because we know that as a society that's what needs to happen. So why aren't we doing that? So there's a cultural policy piece, there's a funding policy piece, but there's also an activism piece. There's a responsibility and accountability for us as artists in the community. So that's some pieces around setting the stage. I'm going to put you on the spot. In terms of, before we go to the next piece on these case studies, do you want to comment on your thoughts on the state of reconciliation and redress and some of your experiences and observations around how you think, what you see as positives and some things that concern you? And
this art that we see around the city, these beads that I'm wearing, this earrings, this pattern on this scarf that I have, to people, it's art, right? The house posts that you see around the city, the spindle whorls, the entranceways, the weavings that are hanging at the airport, this is art to people, like a fine art, like a Van Gogh or what have you. But to us, it's a way of life. It's passing down histories, knowledges. Like this, me wearing this today represents my connection to Cessnom and the beads that were found there. And I wear beads because that's what we used to wear to show our pride and to show our, sometimes it would be wealth as well, to show our wealth, right? This is my gold bracelet, my Rolex today, right? And this pattern, right? This pattern is from Deborah Sparrow, and it has the salmon, the journey home, I think it's called, I'm not too sure. But the design elements that you see on here represent the salmon, the 51 salmon streams that used to be here in Vancouver. The flowing of the water, the Coast Salish design elements that are so different from Northwest Coast art. Like we see Haida art everywhere. It's on our bills, right? We see it every day. But when you look at our Coast Salish art, the wood cutting styles, the colors of that we use from the plants to dye our wools, it's so completely different. Totem Poles, Vancouver's most well-known tourist attraction is Totem Park in Stanley Park. But for us, for me, Hue Hue is such a sacred space for me. My son one day is going to be a part of this sacred society, and my daughters are going to be there singing beside him. And this sacred ceremony comes from right there. That's what that means to me. It doesn't mean, oh, cool totems, yeah, let's take a picture, hey, right? So that's what this art means to me. Just recently, Snowyeth Laylam, the shirt that I'm wearing, I wore it today specifically to talk about reconciliation, redress. Snowyeth Laylam is Langara College. In 2016, my late father, Henry Charles, bestowed the name Snowyeth Laylam onto the school. It's now known as Snowyeth Laylam on their paperwork, their letterheads, their signatures, and their emails. It says, thank you on behalf of Snowyeth Laylam. Most recently, they dedicated a house post to my late father, and it's a house post of a woman who is wearing a blanket, who is holding a spindle whorl. And the reason why my dad was in the planning stages, they chose a weaver. He was a part of the team. And they all decided on it being a woman, being a weaver, because she's the one who connects the stories, who keeps the family together, weaves the wool together to pass down the histories and blankets everybody with her love. And then I've always been asked to sit with Deborah Sparrow and to weave. Oh, come over, come have tea, come watch me spin, come watch me warp. And I never had time over the years. Oh, sorry, I'm busy with the kids, or oh, sorry, I didn't come by. And it wasn't until just a few months ago I was asked if I wanted to be a part of this class at Langara. It's a reconciliation class. They've hired Deborah Sparrow to be the instructor, and we're learning how to weave. We're going to make whatever we want to make, blankets, shawls, whatever we're going to make out of it. But we learn from the beginning, from see, I'm still learning, from, parting the wool, roving it, spinning it. We're going to learn how to color it we're going to dig into our science knowledge from the land and look at the different plants and roots and minerals in the land, and how do we use those to dye the colors and create the yellows and the browns and the reds that you see in our weavings. So I'm there taking this as an accredited course, right? But at the same time, I'm learning from a master weaver within my community in an institution, but yet we're sharing our traditional knowledges in this space. And that is a form of redress to me. And, I've, like Cease was saying, it's like a never-ending blanket that's not finished. For me, I've been kind of doing this for a while, right? Cease and Kamala are actually mentors to me a long time ago. Cease taught me and Kamala taught me how to work a camera and how to do interviews, how to frame and all that kind of stuff, how to write scripts. And, I know about our language. I don't know all of it. We're still always learning. I've learned about protocols and stories and ceremonies. And I've learned about blankets and what they mean and the math and science within the weavings and the importance of them and what they mean ceremonial-wise or back in the day when they were comforters, right? But it wasn't until I started taking this course that I really knew about weaving. Now I know this other part of my life, and it really challenged me. So I've gone through grief, like some pretty big grief in the past 3 years. I lost my partner. His 3-year anniversary was just a day ago. Just after that, he lost his father 22 days after that. And then just last year, I lost my father. So 3 big losses in just 3 years. And, I could understand why people lose themselves. Depression, anxiety, whatever, the different stages of grief that people go through. I could have lost myself. But if it wasn't for my culture, if it wasn't for our language, our ceremonial ways, our protocols through grief, getting up and facing the sun and washing with the water in the morning, like these are things that we follow in order to keep us strong and carry us to the next day. So it can be art to some people, but this art is what brought me here today. It kept me strong. It kept me and my children strong. The blankets wrapped us and kept us, protected. The tummuth protected my heart, right? The cedar, protected my head, my thoughts, and the drum and the deer when I'm singing, right? And this could be art to people, but to us, it's a way of life. So I didn't know that this weaving was going to change me in a new way. It's art, right? It's at Snewaith Laylam, the weaving reconciliation is through the fine arts department. That's how it's funded, through fine arts. So it's an art. But to me, it's another way of learning who I am from my culture as a woman, connecting to the supernatural that we always talk about, right? When we're weaving, when I first started spinning, I was so tense and I was like, I couldn't do it, and I kept breaking the loom. It's like, oh man, I broke it again. I probably broke it like 5 times. And then I went up to the mountain and I went for a bath, and then I sang some songs, and I came back home, and I really really treaded the land carefully, right? Treaded my path carefully. So when I went back to the spinner and I started going, it was nothing. I just, oh, here we go. And I got like 2 big things of wool spun. And when I was reading the text from, I can't remember her name, but a Coast Salish, see, this is wrong. I should know this. So from A Salish Weaving, it's a book. And in this text, it talks about when they interviewed the weavers back in like the 1970s or something. They talk about how some women would even be celibate for the time that they were going to be processing the wool, right? Just like canoe training back in the day. Some of the guys couldn't be intimate, for the months leading up to or during the winter ceremonies because they need to be natsamatst, right, of one heart and one mind. And then it also says in this text that when you're spinning, you come into this trance and this supernatural state of like focusing and connecting to the wool. And sometimes even, it said that even songs come out when you're starting to it. And it's the rhythm of the song and the pedaling and the weaving. So anyways, that's understanding the connection of what art means to us. That's what it means to me. It's not just a weaving. It's not just this isn't just a print on something. This represents me as musqueam. This represents me as a salmon. Salmon is my sustenance. So I could go on and on about this kind of stuff. But yeah.
My mother, when she was born and up to 5 years old, spoke the language. Then she went to residential school. And it was not until she had grandchildren that she went to our community, our band office, and asked for the discs for the language and became self-determined that she was going to get her grandchildren speaking the language. So from when my daughter was very young, she was starting to learn elements of the language. Again, I've had bits and pieces here and there because being a single mother, but also being a big supporter of my family in many ways, whether it's financial or doing work that my family needs because, I've always been there for my parents. Then when my father passed, my mother went through a lot of grief. And through that time, she just kept finding ways. Her medicine was imparting knowledge, whether it's stories or encouraging her grandchildren to learn the language. That's, for me, it's like, I guess the greatest teacher of my life is my mother. And I think that that's a really great thing when you can have a parent that has given you so much in your life and that whatever they want, whatever their vision is, you want to be there to support them seeing that. So now my daughter is taking the language class in our community and she's able to bring her daughter to school with her. Her daughter's also been going to a parenting program where they learn the language with some of our best language speakers working with the littlest people in our community. So in our community, that is it's a big thing. Like our people all want to be language speakers of our language. And any word any of us know, we cherish it like it's a gem, like it's the greatest gem of the century, right? And so to have, just to see that between my mother and my granddaughter, that's her great-granddaughter, so between those 4 generations, that loss and then bringing that back is really what is going on for our community. I truly believe that all of our communities are on a big journey of decolonization and that there are so many things we have to let go of, but that's our business, right? That is really our personal work that we need to do as a family, and we see that, in a bigger sense to the wider community that, you can't, if you want reconciliation or redress, you also have to see your part in the work and whatever it is you do to get there. As a person that was really like blessed with teachers in traditional medicines. You know, I went out and did the work that all of those elders asked me to do, and I've been asked at times, oh, how did you learn? I'm like, well, you know, one of the teachers I had, I'd go to her place, and in order to go out with her, I had to help her with a few house cleaning items, or I had to take her on a couple of errands. And you might think, what does that have to do with picking medicines? It has everything to do with it. Because if your teacher is not able to be present and teaching you, and you have an expectation, you know, today we use currency, we use money, but in our traditional ways, we used our human resources. You know, even the stories that I share of the people in our community, I talk about the two sisters, and the thing I really drive home in that story is how those two girls were seen as the high matriarchs of our community, and it wasn't that people came and gave them things. They went around the community to make sure people had what they needed. And so in our worldview, the women always watch out for everybody in our community, and that is our work. And it may not seem glamorous at times, but it's necessary for survival, but it's more than providing somebody with a weaving or a basket of berries or salmon. It's the dialogue that happens when those, you know, I think about how those girls would go around to their community members and make sure, do you have all the blankets you need? Is your family warm? Do they have everything they need? That's about eye contact, that's about dialogue, and that's about concern and everything. Our Squalowans, our heart, everything came from there. And, you know, those are the elements I see in my community, the people that are doing that work every day and watching out for one another. They're still following their teachings, and even if they're dealing with a colonialist mindset of having to have a job and pay bills and, you know, do errands that have nothing to do with their family, they're still, you know, that goal is to get those tasks done, to get back to the important things of caring for our community members and making sure we're all okay. So I think that that's the hardest part of what our journey is today, is balancing those two worlds and bringing those together. But we have to really cheer on those that are doing the work, the artists, the cultural people, you know, the children, especially the children. You know, my little niece, every time I go over to my mom's, she tells me a new word she learned in the language, because she is in an immersion class for preschool. So that's redress. That's what we need. We need to bring our communities back to where we were, and that's a long journey ahead still, but this is the work that helps us get there. So Haichka.
Tasha Faye-Evans is our first case study, and she's got to drive and take care of her little one. But I just also want to shout out, give you props for not only the work that you do with the Welcome Post project at Noons Creek Fish Hatchery, but also the fact that you stepped up and ran for city council in Port Moody. And, yeah.
Haichka Osim. The redress in Port Moody is something that I'm deeply driven to do, because I'm raising two children in this community, which is at the end of the Broad Inlet, that was shared territory of the Tsleil-Waututh and the Quequitlam and Kwantlen and Stotlow, and Musqueam came in, and Squamish used that land too. And in my community where I'm raising my children, they don't acknowledge territory. And there is no recognition of any First Nations culture, let alone Coast Salish people. And I too feel that the acknowledgement is really important, and it's not just the acknowledgement, it's the education behind the acknowledgement that's important. And it's the vision that saying that acknowledgement that's important towards leading us to healing. So when I was first coming to City Council to say, I have this amazing project, I want to raise a house post in our iconic Rocky Point Park. so that we can acknowledge the gateway to the Salish Sea and bring recognition to the first people whose stories are singing in this land. My mayor said to me at the time, because he got voted out, yes. He said to me, oh, that's never going to happen. Yeah, and he also said when I ended up still doing this project where we invited the residents of Port Moody down to the creek, and Cease came and guided so many different people through the forests and sharing the indigenous names and the medicinal uses of the plants that are growing and the fruit that is available. We connected residents to the land from a Coast Salish point of view. And then we told stories and history from that land. And then we invited a Coast Salish artist, a Squamish artist, to come, and he listened as a witness to the community share what they had learned throughout the year walking with Cease, and knowledge keepers coming and sharing stories and histories. And then James took that, and as an artist does, and what his role was to hear what the community was saying, and he designed a house post. And that house post was then collaborated with, the carvers were part of the community, came, and school groups and children and elders and seniors. And so within, we created this space, an indigenous space that was led by indigenous people, Coast Salish people. And then we had a ceremony on National Indigenous Day. And I invited the mayor to come, and so I got a message from the secretary, and she said, so, should he come by the stage around 8:30? And I was like, So I went to his office, and I brought him a tobacco bundle, and I said, I'd like to invite you to come as a witness so that he could stay from the beginning until the end. And indeed, he stayed until the beginning and the end, and he stood up. He looked at the cedar and he said, so here I've been witness to a blessing of this yellow cedar that's 600 years old. And he says, and I've only been here for 100 years. And that meant so much for me to hear him say that, because he had that learning not just because I came and told him, hey, you need to acknowledge territory, let me give you a workshop. He came to that recognition within his own heart because he witnessed our work, our way of life, and we honor artists, and we bless our posts and our art, and as we reveal it. And he witnessed that, and in that witnessing, he came to a healing in his own heart, and education came organically. And that's what we need to do. That's redress.
I grew up in Seattle till I was 12. Moved to Vancouver Island. Lived in my mom's territory. She's Kwakwaka'wakw from Cape Mudge on Quadra Island, and my dad's Coast Salish from Penelakut Island. So I grew up mainly in the Duncan Cowichan area. Started to learn a lot about my Coast Salish ancestry, and basically been an artist since I was 17. And I'm proud to say I'm a part of the Salish Renaissance that kind of was started with Susan Point breaking the market barrier, in a sense of bringing Coast Salish form line to the front, not form line, but Coast Salish art to the forefront of native art, and I guess the commercial market in terms of like the Vancouver Art Museum and all these galleries that you see here in Vancouver. She opened the door and I kind of just walked through. When I started, there was Susan Point, Charles Elliott, Simon Charlie, that were recognized as Coast Salish artists. So I'm pretty happy and proud to say I was a part of that renaissance. And I think working in the community like Vancouver has definitely been a tough go of it. Nothing against northern style art like Haida or Tsimshian or Kwakwaka'wakw, but I came here over a year and a half ago with the intention of painting Vancouver Coast Salish, and it's going to be a long road. I'll see what I can do, but I'm making my steps towards it, and I have a lot of friends that are Coast Salish artists now. Luke and John Marston and Jody Broomfield, to name a couple of them. But for me, working in the art market has been a struggle, yet it's been a great teacher. A lot of my family would say, you know, those fucking galleries are ripping you off. They pay you $100 and they sell it for $200, and it's like it's tough. I think a way to break the market barrier in terms of to become a successful artist, in terms of finances, has been to work with galleries. I don't know if it's my age. I'm 45. I became a grandfather at 40. And now, as I get older as well, I think I mature more and realize, like, we're here, we're never going anywhere. I don't think we'll... I mean, the hard part of being a Coast Salish person is to realize that we have to work together with non-natives, whether it be white person, Asian people, you know, any other races. We're all here together, so I think we're going to have to figure out a way to work together. And Canada has had this idea of First Nations people as being status Indian, and people don't know what that means, especially non-Native people. It's the shittiest thing in history to be a status Indian. I have a house. The house is in my name. The land is in my name, but it's under trust with the tribe, which is under Crown. So I don't own my house. I don't own my land. I can't. People don't understand how difficult the Indian Act has made being a First Nations person. I think being an artist coming here in Vancouver for the last year and a half, it has been a way for me to grow the way I want to be able to have that ability to say, no, this is what I'm doing. If you don't want it or if you don't like it, I don't care. I'm going to move on to somebody who will. So it's definitely been, having grandkids has definitely opened my eyes to stay stronger, be more positive. I want to educate Canada through my art one way or another. I don't want to point fingers. I don't want people to feel guilty. I just want people to understand where we come from. You're in our territory, and we're not trying to kick you out. We're trying to have you understand where you're living is our traditional territory. This is where we came from. This is who we are. You took our language, you took our culture, you tried to take our art, and now we're still here, and we're not going anywhere. So in order to make it work, we all got to work together, and I want to do that with art. I want to educate people with art. I've done a few things with University of Victoria. We did a class on the residential survivors, and we did a 3-month course in anthropology, and all the students were non-native. So I created a piece. I should have sent it to. I created a piece that reflected what the students learned about the residential school and how it affected our people. And everything about that class was so heartbreaking, but it was so positive, the gain that these students got and the understanding that they had after being educated, what the residential school did to our families, to our culture, to our communities. So I created this 9-foot by 4-foot cedar panel that reflected what they had learned. And so to me, that's when it started for me I could do something great with this art. I can educate people on the history of First Nations people in Canada, especially Coast Salish people. So I don't know if that helps you guys understand a bit more about why this is being brought up. But I think it's important that we acknowledge, the acknowledgement of saying we're on Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam lands was great back in 2010, I believe is when it started during the Olympics. But it's like molasses. It doesn't hold water anymore. It doesn't impress me that the premier or some sort of the mayor or whoever says it anymore. It hasn't done anything. It stayed in the same place it was when they first started saying it. It hasn't changed what we view this territory. So I think that it's molasses. It's moving very slowly. And I think it needs to move a little faster, but at the very least, have meaning behind it. It doesn't mean anything to me as a Coast Salish person. But yeah, so.
Maynard, Johnny.
My name is Sanya. My father was a refugee from post-World War II Yugoslavia. My mom was a settler from England. I was born in Vancouver, the traditional ancestral and unceded territory, the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish people. And I work in Burnaby. I've spent a long time, really long time, trying to learn about Indigenous history and Indigenous people in Vancouver. And so it was a little strange to find myself in this quintessential white pioneer village in Burnaby. And when I came to the museum, we did not talk about Indigenous history in Burnaby. And I think we recognize now that Burnaby Village Museum for too long was not just complicit, but active in erasing and suppressing and making people feel unwelcome. Let me gather my thoughts. And so one of the first things we did before we began to think about how we could change that and bring those stories back was to reach out to the many local nations that share territory in Burnaby. Like good guests, we went to our hosts to ask for guidance and to get to know each other. And so we had many meetings with friends at Musqueam. We met new friends at Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish and Kwantlen and Coquitlam. And that was really important, starting on that good path from the beginning. And since then, we have been able to bring in different artists and knowledge keepers and cultural workers to do work at the museum, including Cease Wyss and Carleen Thomas, who, if you know these women, this was an amazing honor to have them at the museum. And I think that today I'm realizing even more how much we are asking of people like Cease and Carleen to come and do this work. So we have these educators talking about their history from their perspective, but the museum as an institution is not yet speaking about this history. Again, following protocol, we have gone to Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Kwantlen to ask for permission to do research, to find out information, and to make sure that this knowledge is shared in a good way. Asking for permission and having people feel comfortable with this is really important for us. So we've been working on this project for a few years now. And I want to acknowledge Sharon Fortney and Kamala Todd too. This information is going to come out. It's going through a review process, and we are very patiently waiting. We are not in any rush. We want to make sure that we're sharing this in a good way. And I will say that working for the city of Burnaby is it's different. It's different in Burnaby. And
Sorry, what does different mean? Is that like weird?
I'm embarrassed to say, and I had to share this.
This
with
won't get
Cease and
back to them. They're
Carleen,
not watching the video.
that it was only until this year that we were saying unceded territory, right? And that took a long time. And yeah, it's interesting in the city. There's a lot of cultural institutions, libraries, and planners who, because there hasn't been that relationship building, I think are feeling really lost and trying to play catch up. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Lianne Payne. I'm a British, English, Irish, Welsh, second generation Canadian from Quebec area who's lived in the Coast Salish territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation for 25 years, and have slowly been figuring out what that means and what my responsibility and role is in regards to that. And one of my current relationships and responsibilities is on the North Shore at an organization called Wild Bird Trust of BC. And it is mandated to manage a conservation area of the Maplewood Flats, and is the territory of Tsleil-Waututh, and is in a process with Irwin and Donna and a number of other community members decolonizing that organization and being more proactive in building that or re-acknowledging that relationship and bringing in Tsleil-Waututh members on in a more meaningful way. And so I'm just going to mention a very brief example. Wild Bird Trust has a annual festival called the Osprey Festival, and this past summer we had Ocean Highland, who's Tsleil-Waututh Nation. She was a summer student doing some Coast Salish heritage project work with the Wild Bird Trust and completing an artwork. But also she and Squamish Nation, mother, community member, daughter of Cease, mother of Kamala, and communication person, she and Ocean were curating the program that happened at Osprey Festival. And so it was just really important that you know, Irwin and I, for example, step back and just support them in doing that work that they're completely capable of doing and appropriate for them to be to doing that work. So just that's kind of my little bit there.
Donna Clark, third generation Canadian. Not sometimes I say Canadian and sometimes I don't. Third generation settler. On the Wild Bird Trust of BC board for 1.5 years now, and we manage the Maplewood Flats Conservation Area in North Vancouver. It's about 2 kilometers from the Tsleil-Waututh village site, right on Burrard Inlet. And it's 320 acres. And one of the first things we did as a new board is we, in our goal for redress, one of the things we did was commission some public art of 4 Tsleil-Waututh and Coast Salish artists, Ocean Highland, Jordan Galley, Zachary George, and James Harry. And so these public works are right on the land, on the 320 acres. And for us, our motivation was to honor, remember, and show gratitude for the stewardship of the conservation area, what we now call the conservation area, for 13,000 years since the last ice age. Often the history of the conservation area has only gone back a few decades, and as a new board we were very aware that it actually goes back 13,000 years. We try and incorporate traditional ecological knowledge, and in that sense we understand that to work as a conservation area, we can't separate that from culture, because the stories we tell ourselves and each other affect how we treat each other and how we treat the land. And in this way, we're honored to be working with, as much as possible, the Tsleil-Waututh and Coast Salish people, and for their guidance in going forward in a good way in our work on this land and waters in North Vancouver, so-called North Vancouver. Thank you.
So cool.
Yeah.
Thank you both very much for sharing. It's just important for us to have these moments of hearing from the community and what people's experiences are, whether they're hard or simple. Nothing is really simple. I think there's always challenges, and even just thinking about the work that's been done at Maplewood Flats, when I talk to people about how a bunch of community members have worked on decolonizing this space, people kind of laugh and go, well, it's just a place you go walking in the forest. Why does it need decolonizing? But it's the people that manage that site. And a lot of heavy stuff had to be dealt with. It had to be detoxified, and to have dedicated members coming in to do that work, that is what we're talking about. It is the work. There's nothing easy about getting rid of stuff we don't need, right? So.
Can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
There's when I was sitting here listening to all the speakers, there's a couple of many points that I can relate to, but there are kind of two things that I really related to. Maynard, when you were talking about like your housing situation, I too own a home on reserve, inherited, blah, blah, blah. But because I'm under this like certain section under the Indian Act and whatever, I actually don't qualify for specific funding from my Indian reservation, from the government, and all this kind of stuff. So as a single mom, I'm out here busting my butt trying to fix my house at the same time. So it's a lot of work. And when we're looking at like funding programs and projects and stuff like that, some of the funding that is out there that I can apply for as an artist, I actually can't apply for because I don't have a nation attached to my name. Like, I am Christie Charles from Musqueam, but if I don't work in the band office as a person who is a part of the administration team, then I can't apply for that funding. So that's where a lot of it's missing, is I can't apply because I'm not the nation representing. And then also with the Wild Bird Trust, the work that is being done kind of across the city, not just with Wild Bird Trust, but like different little projects that have happened here and there. Two things, at the Roundhouse and at Wild Bird Trust, one of the artists, Jordan Galley, who's from Tsleil-Waututh, he lives in Musqueam, who's with my friend, who's from Musqueam. So they're a couple and they have a child from Musqueam. But when I'm at their home spending time with them, I'm sitting there, we're having coffee or having dinner or whatever, but he's sitting at the table and he's like, oh yeah, sis, and he's drawing, oh yeah, this is the new logo for this place, or oh, this is the new panel that's going up at City Hall or something like that. So it's a part of our everyday lives, right? Interaction. I'm learning what he's doing, and we're sharing stories at the same time, and those stories are going into that work. At the same time, his partner is also being inspired, and they're creating art together, right? She's helping him around the background, doing the administrative work while he's doing the creative stuff. And then their kids are there learning about, oh, these carving tools are this, or this tracing paper's for that, or whatever, right? So it's like that intergenerational teaching, like what Cease is talking about through her 4 generations, from her mother, her daughter, and her granddaughter. It's the same with us. It's all interconnected. And when my kids go to North Van to visit their family in Tsleil-Waututh, their grandma and their uncle take them down to the Wild Bird Trust. They take them down to the water. They take them down there. And so they get this sense of pride. Oh, Mommy's show's going to be there. Oh, Uncle's art's over there. Oh, look, there goes the blankets when we're driving past Granville. So it's not just recognizing that, we're still here. It's our children and our great-grandchildren and the future leaders that are going to have that connection and have that strength within them. And I know Kamala's going to get up here and talk, but I just want to praise Kamala. She and Irwin. For the work that they do, because they truly understand what we're saying. And they get in there and they want to do what's right, and they want to share the right stories and not just do it because it's trendy or because they're getting paid or because it makes them look good. I just learned recently that Kamala's family has been connected to Musqueam for generations. And it's so amazing. And she has a document that was published by the city, your report. What's it titled again? Truth telling.
Everybody
Look at
was
the-
emailed. Everyone was
Yes.
emailed a link to that.
Yes, so get in that, look at that truth-telling document that she created. She hits it. We sat in different groups over the years with different artists, Cease, me and Cease being a part of these different groups. But the imagery that she has within this documentation, it connects you to what she's talking about. She truly took the time to hear, understand, feel, learn, and share in a good way, not just because it was her job.
Kamala, and I was born and raised here in these lands, but I'm not of these lands. My own ancestors are Métis Cree from the prairies on my mother's side, and my dad is a first-generation settler of German immigrants. So because I was born and raised in these lands and so grateful to be in this beautiful part of the world, I'm learning my obligations. I'm learning my responsibilities, and according to my own teachings of reciprocity, how I can give back. So growing up in a very colonial environment and having to learn and unlearn and relearn the nature of this place that I am so lucky to call home and where my children were born. I have learned from my sisters, my friends, my teachers, Cease and Christie and others in their communities, that generosity of sharing and that generosity of being hosts. And so I'm actually here to introduce myself as the new the City of Vancouver's Indigenous Arts and Culture Planner. So I speak in that capacity. I want to introduce myself in that way. I see myself as a facilitator. I feel honored to be in that role of trying to facilitate the city's relationships with the people of these lands, as well as my own urban Indigenous community. We also have a history here, but it's a very short history here. So according to my teachings, it's about thinking about my own obligations to these lands, to the ancestors, to my children, to their children, to all our relations, and how I can carry that in the work that I do. And just getting to be part of projects with these women and learn from them and see them have such a powerful impact on the rest of us with what they share, and what we can learn from that is transformative, because what motivates me is that reciprocity and that obligation, and growing up in an environment that really didn't tell those stories and really put forward certain ideas about who's in charge and who gets to decide and define who we are as a community, what culture is, how our cities should be shaped, and all of those kinds of things. So I really am witnessing right now at the City of Vancouver an opening up and a real expanding of the circle that we're all a part of, and I want to be part of helping to build that circle. I do want to say that there's been a lot of really cool things happening lately that I've been lucky to be part of, and even when I used to work for the City of Vancouver, when you talk about painting the city Coast Salish, like making it really visible, I've been taught by people how important that is, and so I've taken that on as one of my responsibilities, is to help make sure that people know where we are and that people can see and always unquestionably have that sense of this as a Musqueam place, a Squamish place, a Tsleil-Waututh place. And so when I worked for the city back in 2000, I was told by Leah George Wilson, for example, that it was very upsetting to the local people that it was just totem poles in Stanley Park from other places. And so in my position at the city, we were actually able to, me and Karen Henry and Brian Newson at the time, have the Susan Point, the artist call that then resulted in Susan Point's pieces being in that space, and how impactful that was. And hopefully things will continue, and they have continued since then. The Roundhouse has been incredibly open in trying to bring in Coast Salish representation, and so now we have Jordan Galley, Hoya, Richard Baker, and Deborah Sparrow's pieces went up today. So if you can get down there, they're amazing. So that part is all there, and hopefully we'll start seeing that in all of our public spaces and community centers and parks. That just reflects the beauty of this place and the people of this place and the language and the laws. And we'll all continue, those of us who aren't from here, continue to do that learning about where we are and what our own responsibilities to this place are. There's a lot of really cool initiatives happening at the city. I'm just still finding my footing, so I just want to mention that the city does have a new culture plan that we're in the middle of right now that I'm helping with. And there's all kinds of exciting things happening with public art. There's all kinds of exciting things happening with space and facilities in the city. So I don't have business cards yet, but it'll be easy enough to find me, and I just invite you to see me as a contact who can help facilitate this redress and this learning and building that circle that we're all part of. So hi.
All right, thank you, Kamala.